Hi everyone, my name is Billy and you are listening to Humans of Authenticity, the CEO Special Edition. Our guest today is Christina Lewellen, Executive Director at the Association of Technology Leaders in Independent School. I became Christina's fan 2 years ago after attending her session at the ASA annual meetings where she shared her leadership lessons from a road trip experience with other female association executives. I also had the opportunity to work with her on the ASA Small Staff Association Advisory Committee where she holds the past chair positions. I'm so excited to introduce Christina to you guys through the episode today. Welcome to Humans of Authenticity, Christina.
Thank you, V.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our listener first?
Sure. I'm Christina Lewellen, and I am a CAE and an MBA. I'm very proud of those letters after my name. I'm the Executive Director of ATLIS, which is the Association of Technology Leaders in Independent Schools. Our members are primarily technology teams, CIOs, tech directors that serve independent K-12 schools. Technology and education is kind of a crazy industry right now. There's a lot going on, a lot of change happening, and it's been really neat to have a front row seat with my members as they've been navigating first the pandemic and now technology changes. I've been the executive director for 5 years. And before that, I had a journey of being at the VP level for quite a while, kind of pointed in this direction, and also started my association career in magazines and writing for a trade publication. So I've sort of represented or overseen almost every aspect of an association at this point, and it's really been such a happy place for me in terms of building a career.
I love that you've been across many different aspects of association management. Is there one particular area of association management that you are really passionate about?
Well, I started with magazines. I came out of college and I was a journalist. I was writing for newspapers and I did a brief stint in television. I really missed writing and I had had my first child at that point. So I was looking to get away from TV and get back into writing. That's when I was hired by a magazine that was owned by an association. And like many, I had no idea what an association was. But I was smitten as a kitten right in the beginning because not only did it allow me to do what I loved, writing and researching, but it allowed this deep dive into a profession and in supporting an industry. So I got to cover the same industry. I talked to the same sources. I built relationships with folks. I really got to know the industry by covering it for a couple of years. And I was like, this is perfect. This is such a great mix. So I really appreciated that. Then as I got further along, I was developing some new lines of business, creating some new ways to serve other aspects of the membership. And that's when I decided maybe I could strengthen my business skills and I went back to school for business. But I have a spot that's near and dear in my heart in terms of that relationship between vendors and the association. I'm a kind of a weird CEO like that because I really value those partnerships where I think some leaders who don't have the background could say, oh, that's just, they write us a check and that's the relationship. Where I really look at those vendor relationships as partnerships and I try to lean into the vendor community. I know they're working with our members every day. So they have a lot of thought leadership and a lot of experience with our members. I wouldn't say it's like my favorite aspect because now I love them all. I do think that I still have that side of me that's very connected to the publications, non-dues revenue side of running an organization.
I love that you pick up the vendor relationship. I don't think that we talk about vendor relationship enough, like the technique of it, the art of it, and the best practice around it. I remember a couple of years ago, I was involved in this organization back in Australia. And through vendor relationship, understanding priorities, understanding what we can offer, then I just managed to match a lot of those together and be able to create non-dues revenue for the organizations. I'm also interested in one of your very first point about yourself is you have a CAE and you have an MBA. Would you like to share a little bit more about the journey that you obtained these qualifications and how they contribute to your position today?
Yeah, it's a timely question for me because I have 4 daughters between the ages of 18 and 22, and they're all in college. And they've each taken their own journey. And I believe strongly that if I had gone straight into getting a master's after my undergrad, I would have gotten it in the wrong thing because I only knew journalism and I probably would have gotten a master's in journalism And that wouldn't have necessarily broadened my education beyond what I already had, which was an undergraduate degree in journalism and English and communications. So I believe that it was a benefit to get out of school, let my life unfold for about 10 years, and then pursue advanced degrees and certification based on the gaps in my skill set. I've always been a strong communicator, a strong writer, but I didn't have the business background. And more than anything, it scared the life out of me. I was nervous about it. I didn't know if I could make it through the math classes, like global finance and accounting. And as it turns out, I love accounting and I'm actually really great at putting those puzzle pieces together, but I didn't know that about myself back then. So I would say that it's shaped me in that I have pursued opportunity to expand what I already know, not to reiterate or reconfirm what I know. Better stated, I'm trying to shape what I don't know, like basically fill those gaps, right? And so I love that I got a degree in something different. It made me a stronger leader. And then my CAE, I pursued a little bit later. I did it after my MBA just because of the timing. I had started studying for my CAE years ago. Then I had the opportunity to do the MBA. So I took a pause, did the MBA, came back to the CAE, which certainly made the finance part a lot easier. Those domains that I had just learned about in business school. But now I feel very proud because I think those two credentials together, I don't think they're a silver bullet for everyone, but for me, those credentials combined with my original communication skills, I think helped me do the job that I do today.
Was there a moment in time that prompted you to undertake the MBA?
Yeah, I give a lot of credit to the CEO, Phil James, of the trade association that I was working for. I was a magazine person at the time. I can't remember if I was still a writer or an editor at that point. And I was coming up with some ideas for the association to grow or expand its reach. And, he said, if you had a business degree, you'd be dangerous. That's the only piece that you're missing. So in a way, he planted that seed and I had their support. I'm incredibly grateful, not only for Phil James, but for Nicole Harris, these leaders that at the time I was young and they saw something in me that I didn't have the capacity to see in myself. So it's very influential.
That's really cool. I always love to hear who inspire my guests to who they are today. So thank you so much for shout out to the people who uplifted you in your career. You've been in this sector for a long time. What is the one thing that you like the most about yourself during this journey in association management?
Well, I certainly learned a lot about myself, B, because when I came out of my MBA, it was an executive program with adults. And I had just spent this very intense journey with a lot of business professionals, and most of them were in the corporate space. I think I might have been one of the very few in the nonprofit association or government space. And so I had a little itch in me to go to corporate. And I did that right after my MBA. I went over into corporate America, and I think that I did a good job for the time that I spent there. But there was something sort of missing, and it felt a little shallow compared to the depth of what I had come to love about associations. So I went over, I did it for a while, but I really recognized in myself that I needed a mission. I needed something bigger than just making money for the sake of making money or for a family or, for the shareholders, the faceless shareholders. But really what I loved was the idea that we were still running a really efficient and great business, but that we were doing it for whole industry, that the work that we were doing at associations would help people put food on their tables or run a better business themselves. I like that. And I found that I need that. So it taught me something about myself. I was not able to set aside the why. I needed that in order to really feel fulfilled as a business leader and as a professional. And so I learned a lot through that experience. And that's why I think I keep coming back. And I've made a home in association management. And it suits me because I realize that we're doing something bigger than just making money or running conferences, that there's a point to it all.
So the idea of following your heart to pursue a purpose that is bigger than the tangible purposes. How do you find that? How do you lay a path for yourself so that you can get to that bigger purpose?
It's not easy, right? I mentor a lot of younger professionals. And I think because I am a woman and I identify with women specific issues, a lot of people who identify as women tend to gravitate towards me. So I coach a lot of younger professionals, many of whom are women. And that's a question that keeps coming up. It's like, number one, how do you balance it all? But number two, how do you find purpose and meaning when so much of the fire hose is just coming at you all the time? And it's not easy. But I think that what I encourage folks to see is the big, long path rather than the little stops along the way. So, for example, when I became a vice president, kind of entered into that level of leadership with association management, and I had gotten my MBA, I started maybe kind of thinking that I might want to be a CEO one day. But that was something that I knew I wasn't ready for. I knew it was going to take some time. I knew I needed to have a more well-rounded resume in order to get those types of jobs. And so that was like a 10-year trajectory for me. And I made a couple moves along the way, but I think what was important was understanding where the end destination was. And it helped keep me focused because in some of those experiences, you always run across challenges and sometimes you bang your head on the wall and think, why am I doing this? Or why am I in this role? But if I kept my eye on the prize, I could understand where I was headed. And so I think that finding that meaning is going to be a little different for everyone. Like you see sometimes on social media, the idea that a journey is kind of like all over the place. It's not one from point A to point B, but there's lots of zigs and zags in between. I think that's true. If you know what the end journey where you're trying to point yourself towards, I do think that that helps and it gives you something to focus on, kind of rise above some of the day-to-day hiccups.
I'd love to go into the specific of your situations. I'm seeing that you have carved out your path, and I'd love to understand how you did that. What I'm hearing is during your experience as a VP for an organization, you start thinking about perhaps that you could uptake the CEO positions. Was there any specific defining moments, or was there any prompts? Was there any cue that give you that idea? Or did you always want to become a CEO one day?
If you ask people in my family, they will probably tell you that they would have guessed I would be a CEO when I was 5 years old. So there's a certain amount of it that's kind of baked into the personality, right? Organizing and driving toward a goal. But I think that I always assumed that I was a little too unpolished for the CEO role. Like I thought maybe I was a little bit too mouthy or that I wouldn't be able to hide my emotion. I don't have a poker face. I also was nervous, like the political aspects of the job, the shaking hands and resolving conflict. I wasn't sure as kind of a fiery Italian person, like, was I going to be any good at that? But I think the defining moment, I had all these doubts, right? We all have doubts about where our shortcomings are. But what I didn't fully embrace was that I also have strengths to bring to a role like this. So I only focused on my shortcomings and didn't really focus on the things that might make me a great CEO. The other thing that was really hard was that I also didn't see a lot of people like me in leadership positions. And I know that continues to be an issue for different reasons today. But at the time, I would see women in these roles, but I didn't see myself in those women. In other words, they were often older, given that they came to their leadership positions later for many reasons, or they just had different personalities that made them that I couldn't see myself. Like, she's great, but what a calm, steady hand she is. I'm not like that. I just couldn't see where a boisterous, outspoken, get it done kind of a woman was in these roles. And so I couldn't see myself in these positions. And so what really kind of flipped the switch for me was at a couple different points along my path, I would sort of look at somebody in leadership and go, well, man, if he can do that, then I could too. Like, if this guy is running the place, maybe I could bring something to the table. And so I had to build my own confidence just from frustration, plus the desire to do it differently and do it better, plus the desire to offer representation to other women that I didn't see at the time. And that was just coincidental, right? Like, wherever I worked, I just didn't see that. And so I just thought, you know what? Somebody's got to do this job. There's no reason why I shouldn't. And so it was kind of a combination of all of those things rather than any one big aha moment. But I do think that it's a kind of a combination of focusing on the strength that you have. And just because you don't see somebody like you doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in that spot.
It is such a great affirmation for me because at the moment I'm where you describe self. I see all of these amazing leaders out there, but I'm not seeing myself in those. So I appreciate you give me this new affirmation. I love to also unpack this sort of CEO sort of thinking. What is your mantra as a CEO, and how do you show up with this mantra?
I think one of the things is to be authentic. which is why I love the title of your podcast and the work that you're doing here. Authenticity is important, and we lose track of what that means. That doesn't mean that I share with you my life story every day. You don't need to know everything that's happening in my life, nor do my employees and I think of each other as best friends. We don't really buy into the family mentality that some work cultures, but we bring a high level of transparency and respect to the situation. So I think as a leader, I try to be authentic. There are times where I will say to my staff, if you need an answer right now, the answer is no. But if you can let me sleep on it, if you can let me eat because I'm hangry, or just get away from my desk for a walk, maybe I can consider this with a clearer head. But if you need an answer right now, the answer is no. And there's times where my team will laugh because I'll block my schedule. Like if my flight gets delayed and I get in late, I'll block my schedule the next morning and say, I'm grumpy and I need to sleep in. And I literally write that in the calendar block. So I try to be transparent about where I'm at. And that also means not just from a leadership perspective, but also I show them finances. We take time on our staff call to walk through the status of the organization, the health of the organization. If they're not tapped into the work that the board is doing, I try to make sure they understand what the board is working on. So I think that overall, my mantra is to be myself, but I also bring to it a certain amount of work ethic, which I think is kind of baked into who I am, where I also have a mantra that I would never ask anyone to do anything I wouldn't do myself. So if the garbage needs to be taken out at the end of the day, I'm going to take the garbage out at the end of the day. And so that's the kind of leadership approach I have. And I don't care if I end up working at the largest association known on this planet and I have all the staff and all the resources I need, I will always be a leader who has a project. Because otherwise I'd be bored. I don't want to just shuffle papers and do approvals. I want to get my hands dirty and do a project and have something I'm personally responsible for. And I think that sets a good example for my team.
That's really cool. How would your staff describe you?
I don't know. I get embarrassed sometimes because they're so sweet. They're very effusive. I have a very loyal and friendly team, I think, because as you know, I'm a little progressive in terms of creating a workplace culture and what I believe we as humans owe each other. Like, yes, you're working and you're giving your time and energy and expertise to ATLIS. That's important, but also like you're a human and you can't just set that aside when you come to work. And so I think that my team would say that I respect the human aspects of their lives and that I'm flexible but demanding, and that we run hard, we run fast, and we stay focused. But then I also have a really contemporary workplace where we have 4-day work weeks and unlimited PTO and a really, I think, inclusive environment to make sure that we're addressing everyone's needs as individuals. So I would hope that they would say that I'm tough, but that I'm worth it.
I appreciate hearing that. I'd love to get into the keyword discussion now, since you select a very, very cool one. Would you like to share with us your keyword and also why it's important for you to talk about this keyword?
Yeah, so I picked generosity. I love that you did this. I had to think a long, hard time on the options that you provided as well as any others. But I picked generosity because I think that it is important to bring a generous spirit to the work that we do. If you're in this work to feed your ego, I think it's apparent. What I mean by that is, like, sometimes I will come across other association leaders who complain about their members. And I'm like, wait, do you hate your members? You're kind of acting like you hate your members. And if you hate your members, you need to check yourself. Like, you need to be at a different association or maybe doing different work. So for me, I think that generosity in your spirit is that you have to find empathy and understanding. You have to really fall in love with your members and understand the work they do, but also respect the work they do. Because I think sometimes also I feel there's this little disease running through association leaders where we sometimes forget that we're there for our members and for our industry, and we have to bring respect to what we do. And so I think that that's really important. So, there is a certain amount of servant leadership that comes along with this work. Generosity to me is not a word that represents money or gifts as much as I'm an act of service kind of love language person, where I just think that even just going the extra mile and thinking of somebody when they don't expect it can go a really long way. So I bring that to my leadership style, I hope, I think. And while nobody's perfect, both in my work life, but also in my marriage and with my kids, I just try to bring a lot of service and generosity to those relationships because they matter to me.
Thank you so much for that. You gave me a lot to unpack here. How you show up with generosity when you're dealing with your members and then when you manage your staff. Are you happy to go with each of those?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I've heard when you say how you show up with generosity when dealing with your members, you say that we understand that we are there for our members. We are there to support the industry and advocate for our members in our industry. You also say that we have to bring respect to what our members do. Can you explain to me what it means? Or is there a stories or is there any specific initiatives you're putting together to elaborate this?
Yeah. I think where that comes from is in the past, in other industries that I've represented, I noticed among some of the top leadership of the associations, like the C-suite, that if they're representing a blue collar industry, that there's a little bit of a looking down the nose at the members, right? Like, oh, well, they're not college educated, they don't have MBAs. But I would sit back and go, they're literally the engine of this economy. They're driving all of this revenue. They're running independent businesses and they're doing incredible work serving their space and their industry. It doesn't always happen, and I hope it happens a lot less now. But when I was a young professional, it really taught me this very interesting lesson because I'm a small town girl. I grew up in a really rural area in Western New York, and there was a lot of socioeconomic diversity in not only where I grew up, but even in my family. My dad's generation grew up on a farm, and then they all went off and became engineer type professions, working to solve problems from having grown up on a farm. And now they're solidly middle and upper middle class humans. I'm only like that one heartbeat away from farm life kind of thing. And so it just struck me that coming down here to DC and building a career, I'd be in a fancy air conditioned office with a bunch of C-suite people who are looking down their noses at our hardworking members. And so I hope that's not happening now. But that's where I think this generous spirit came from in me, is that I'm a small town girl and I will never forget that. And so, people who are earning a living and taking care of their families deserve that kind of respect. So I think that's really where that comes from. And I've just brought that into every space that I've worked in. It's easy when you make the time to truly fall in love with your members and find authentic respect deep in your heart for your members. Then you can be authentic because it's real, it's not forced.
What I'm hearing is somewhere along the line, there was a lack of genuine understanding between the C-suite of the headquarters with the nuances. I love how you say make the time to feel in love with our members and try to understand what they do. Is there a project that you can share with us so that we can learn how this look like in practice?
Well, I think the thing that struck my current organization when they were hiring me, I was going through the search process with ATLIS. And in that interview, I was already using language that was like, we need to, not you need to, or they need to, or the members need to. But just in the simple process of researching and preparing for that interview, I put myself in the shoes of, if I am their executive director, what do I think will advance these hardworking, incredible humans who are supporting today's learners at independent schools? And so by the time I sat down at that table to speak with the hiring committee and the board, I was already using we language. We need to do this and we should look at this. And I'm excited about the opportunities that we have. And at one point during that interview, one of the founding members of the organization stopped me and said, you keep saying we like you already have this job. And I laughed, but I said, that's not an affect. Like, I'm not just playing a role here. I'm truly envisioning myself serving this community. And so that's the kind of thing, that's not really a project, but that's an example, I think, of when you come into these roles, you have to make a commitment, just like you would with a marriage. You have to invest in your understanding of the people you serve, their issues, their challenges, their strengths. And, doing that, I think really opens up the opportunity to fall in love with them, but to also really respect where they're coming from.
This is incredible. I'm hearing that during the preparations, not only you understand your own values, you also obtain understanding of the values of the community that you serve. Could you talk me through how you did that during your research?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably an accident, in my first CEO pursuit, but I have since learned, and I will take this lesson with me whenever I'm ready to make a change, is that the audience does matter. The industry matters, right? Like our skill set is transferable in the C-suite or really any rank. You could go work at another association. But what's interesting is I do think you should research and learn about the community to which you're going, because if you can't find a way to empathize or connect or see yourself as supporting that community, maybe that's not a great fit for you. So I've learned, because I love my ATLIS community so much, I've tried to actually stop in these moments and put words around what it is I love about them. Because if and when it's time for me to move on, I want to make sure that I don't lose sight of the things that made this so, oh, I mean, I wouldn't say easy, but easy, right? Like, what is it about this community that resonates with me? And so I have a little private Asana board, my project management system. And every time I have a moment where I find myself very connected to either an ATLIS individual member or a group of ATLIS members, I try to sit in that moment and understand what it is about that I really enjoy. For example, my community is very quick to laugh and be friendly when I'm on stage at the annual conference. So if I'm myself and I'm being dopey and I either like use silly language or crack a joke, they go with me. And so last year I came off the stage and my heart was full. I felt so good. They were laughing. They were sitting forward in their seats. They were energized. And I went to my little private Asana message and I made sure to write down that having an audience that really values my personality made me feel more connected with them, which makes me inspired to serve them even better. So it isn't just that they're feeding an ego, it's that we connected, and because they get me and I get them, I feel so inspired to work hard for them. And I hope that my team does too. So it's important to notice those little things as you go.
I'm seeing not only you understand all the values between the two groups, you also manage to align your own values with the value of the community you serve. And from that, you can share the language. You can empathy with them at a more genuine level. And I love how you note down all of your happy moments into a list. I will steal that idea. I love
Good,
that.
you should. You should.
Yeah.
Because too often we are only making a list of the things that we struggle with, or the next time I take a job, it won't be this or this or this. Make sure you take time to notice what you want it to be. Manifest the things that you love about your current job so that you can recreate that when you go to find another one, or at least try to.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's move the conversations to generosity with your, how do you show up with generosity when working with your team?
Well, I think it's important to ask on a regular basis how they value recognition, like what kind of generosity matters to the team. And it's going to be different for every person. Some people come from a really toxic environment and they want affirmation and they want to be told they're doing a great job when they are, not when they're not, but when they are, they want to be recognized with affirmation. Other people appreciate generosity in the typical fashion of, look, I'm here to earn a living. I'm going to work really hard for you and I want to be rewarded with a generous compensation package. And so I have to kind of find that mix. And for me, generosity as a boss means being generous with my time, that even when I'm tired and hangry and I'm ready to go home for the day, if somebody needs me, I'm there for them. I want to make sure that I bring generosity in terms of supporting life's emergencies. When those things pop up, there have been times where my team is like, I'll be back tomorrow. I swear I'll put this fire out in my life and I'll be back tomorrow. And I instead say, actually, I'd rather you take the rest of the week off and come back on Monday and be in the right spirit and have your heart straight, have your head straight to get back to the work at hand. So I try to be generous with all the typical things. We're incredibly generous with benefits packages. How we recognize dependents is very broad. We're small. So legally, we don't have to follow the Family Medical Leave Act, but we do anyway. And I think that we actually exceed it a little bit, because I feel like when I was coming up through, I was worried about being pregnant and taking maternity leave and doing mom stuff. And so I try to bring a generous spirit to allowing my staff to have a life and build the family that they want, however they define family, even if that means that they have a furry baby that needs support or go to the doctor, the vet, whatever. So I just try to bring a lot of generosity and understanding to the fact that we're all humans and that we need some time. And that's why really when we experimented with a 4-day work week a couple of summers ago, and then it was going so well. And I was seeing all my staff were starting to take their kids to the zoo, and they were starting to move all their appointments to that Friday so that the Monday through Thursday was a lot more focused. And so I just saw the productivity kind of going through the roof, and certainly their happiness and their balance. And so I said, well, let's keep this little pilot program going. So we kept it going. We tried to drive additional efficiencies into the organization. And by the end of the year, we made it permanent. And we've been on it now for almost 2 years. And so it's really effective for us. And I think that that is also an example of bringing a generous approach to how I am as a leader and how I am as a boss.
I love that. You mentioned different team member wants different things. I'm trying to understand the nuance of it. How do you manage these differences, but at the same time ensure a consistent experience for your team members?
Well, I think part of it is I have the good fortune to be leading a small team right now. So I know everybody, and I know their preferences, and I know their situation, and I try to respect how they like to be communicated with and how they like to be recognized, all that. Sometimes it's that I do something fun for everybody. We were a few days into running our annual conference at a high altitude location, and I could see one morning that everybody rolled in looking just a little wiped out, a little green around the gills. Everybody was trying to muster the energy, but I'm like, not everybody's feeling great. So I brought in like a mobile IV drip company to give us all IVs or hydration so that we could get our energy back and power through the rest of the conference. So sometimes it's a solution for everyone. Sometimes I hear of my peers who lead large organizations. They'll say, I just simply can't possibly know everyone. So I can't know everyone's preference. And where I definitely respect that, what you can know is your energy bleeds into your C-suite, and you have that expectation that your C-suite takes that down to your manager level, and your manager level takes it down to your rank and file level. I do think that you can issue secondhand generosity or third-hand generosity if you are clear about the kind of culture that you expect. So right now it's easy for me because my team is fairly small, but I know that at some point I am likely to be leading a much larger team, whether it's here at ATLIS or somewhere else. And I will never have the excuse that I just don't know or that I can't customize the culture. I think that too often CEOs sort of turn their heads to bad cultural things that are happening deeper into their organization. That's still their problem. That's their responsibility. And if they're turning a blind eye to it, then that speaks, I think, volumes about that CEO. So I don't care how big your organization is, you are the chief cultural leader of the group. You got to bring that kind of energy to all levels, not just your immediate report.
I appreciate that you're sharing the nuances. I recognize that before we get into the personal situation, I'm hearing that you already have a strong policy and procedures to start with to guide all of the personalized experience.
Yeah, for sure. We have the baseline policies of unlimited PTO or a 4-day work week, or we cover the employees 100% and their families at 75% for our robust benefits package. All of that stuff is policy. You can have an unlimited vacation policy, but if you never let anyone take vacation, or if you shame them for taking time off, that doesn't do any good, right? So there also has to be this cultural frosting on the cake. The policies and procedures are what everybody's entitled to, and it's fair. But then you as a leader, I think, also have to bring support for those policies at all times. Otherwise, they might not feel like they should take advantage of them.
I appreciate that. Before we move to the last part of the conversations, is there anything else you'd like to share about generosity?
Not many people probably know that my husband and I have 2 biological daughters, and we're very open about sharing how our family became 4 daughters. Our youngest daughter was best friends with a little girl in 5th grade. This was years ago. And that little girl was about to go into foster care. And so while we were not in the market for being foster parents or adoptive parents, like that was never on my bingo card ever, we suddenly found ourselves in a position to take in first our daughter Mackenzie and later her older sister Caitlin. So we have 2 adopted daughters and 2 biological daughters. And where this was not our plan, it's one thing to bring a child into your house. We adopted when she was 11, and Caitlin we adopted when she was 17. And so they know their bio family. what was interesting is I had to learn a lot about generosity, not in terms of bringing in these kids. You would think that that would be the generous part, but what was actually the hardest and the limits of my own generosity was to co-parent and co-raise these children with strangers. But it's been an incredible journey because it means that I've gotten to know some really incredible grandparents and cousins and people that I would have never met and I would have never had in my life if not for my daughters coming into our world. And so the limits of generosity, I surprise even myself sometimes. People ask me how I did it and how I managed it and how in the world I invited all of this chaos into my life. The reality is that I originally did it for those girls, but then my husband and I realized that we also have expanded the meaning of family and welcomed a lot more people into our world. My example might be extreme, but don't ever limit yourself. When you think about generosity, push the limits even in yourself, because you may be surprised what comes out of it. You may be feeling like you get out over your skis or that you're being too generous or that you're being taken advantage of. But for me, I went there anyway. And the gifts that I've received from having taken that risk have been hard to describe. It's brought so much richness to my life and our lives, and it was worth it. So be generous. It's worth it.
It's really cool. I'm hearing never doubt ourselves any moment that we want to be generous with anything coming up in our life. I love that. Thank you. For the last part of the conversations, I love to talk about your legacy as the ED of ATLIS. What legacy you envision that you will be developing for ATLIS?
You know, V, I think that the association community is a small world. And we have all either worked with somebody at an organization or worked at that organization before or after somebody that we meet. My intention, my goal is to build ATLIS in a way that whoever comes next will be proud to take it. In other words, I would love it if someday, V, when you're ready and you want to be the CEO of an organization, that you hear that ATLIS is hiring for an executive director and you think to yourself, ooh, that's Christina's team. I will definitely take that job. I want to leave something in a lot better shape than I ever inherited. And I think that my goal is to not only create an organization that another leader would feel really excited about coming in and taking over, but also creating a situation where ATLIS feels very confident in having that transition happen at some point. So the board and I have been working for years on, we don't really call it succession planning. We call it business continuity planning. We've made very concerted efforts to make sure that the organization is not dependent on one human, but that it will continue in perpetuity in a really strong position, regardless of who turns over on the board, who turns over on the staff. We've had this shared partnership commitment to making sure that we're really, really strong for whatever comes next, knowing that I'm not ready to go. They're not ready to have me go. We have a great working relationship, and I love the idea of being here for the foreseeable future. But when it's time, I want this organization to be something that people scramble. I want them to have so many CEOs knocking down the door and applying for the job that they don't even know what to do with themselves. That to me will be a legacy worth fighting for.
That is so inspirational. How do you operationalize something like that?
That's a good question. It's hard to have these conversations. And I think that I'm lucky that my board is really open to taking the people out of the equation. So we can have a conversation about the board chair without naming the chair. We can have a conversation about the executive director without naming me. And so I think that we started, just like we talked about on the staff side with generosity, having policies. We started with policies that put words to paper around what would happen if the executive director leaves on her own versus is asked to leave versus gets hit by the proverbial bus. So we've tried to make sure that we're addressing different scenarios so that when those moments of crisis happen, we already have a game plan about how we're going to handle it. And that way, nobody's scrambling in that moment. I think also investing in the professional development, both of the board and of my staff, making sure that if for some reason I was unwell and I couldn't do something, I have tons of staff that could step in and take over presenting at a session. Or if the board chair had to dip out for some reason, there were other people on the board that could step up and lead in that capacity whether it's short term or long term. So we just make sure that we have a game plan. And I don't know why more organizations don't do that. Maybe they'd rather just be like, no, it'll never happen. Our ED will never leave. But that's not realistic. And so instead, we would rather just talk about it. And I think that we have the kind of shared trust that we can have hard conversations like that.
It is so cool. From a small staff association setting, we are always limited of time, always limited of resource and staffing capacities. There are always competing priorities. So I'm curious, how do you manage to carve out time to look into this work? And how do you convince the board to carve out their own time to work on this initiative with you?
Well, first, I think it helped to shake off the mental frames of being too small, right? I tend to think of us more like it's an advantage, it's an opportunity rather than a disadvantage, because I've worked at really large organizations that are also constantly constrained by resources. Like the bigger the beast, the more you have to feed it. And so I feel like no matter what size you are, there's never an unlimited pool of resources. So shaking off that image and sort of focusing on what you can do. We're very entrepreneurial. We move quickly. We get things done. We tend to think of like, how can we get to yes, but how can we get to yes quickly? So we're always iterating and kind of like the little speedboat. Not that we're like frantic, we have a game plan, but I do think that when you are speedy and nimble, you can make time for these big picture things. We've done more in the way of governance training at the board level and the big picture, like continuity planning. And it simply just comes from like, we can do this. We don't need to make this a big ordeal that lasts 3 years with 10 committees. Like, I'll put some thoughts on paper. I'll bring it to the executive committee. The executive committee will bat it around a little bit, and then let's take it to the board. So we just move quickly. We don't get encumbered by a lot of red tape. And so I think that we get a lot done that way. And it's just a mindset more than anything. Everybody wishes they had a little bit more money and a little bit more time. But rather than being burdened by that, I just try to like ignore it. And I'm inherently positive. And so we're going to just get stuff done. Let's just pretend the answer is yes and figure out how to get there.
That's awesome. I'm hearing that somewhere along the conversation that you have with the executive committee and your board, you also managed to shift their mindset so that they can be a lot more on board with your initiatives and ideas.
Yeah, and mine with theirs. We have a great collaboration, a true partnership in terms of the value. We always said, you tell me whether you want to go to California or Colorado, and then I'll figure out how we're going to get there. But you got to tell me where we're going. And, you could say, well, California's got the beach, but Colorado has the mountains. So it's really their job to say, you know what, right now I think we should go to California. Or they might say, as we grow, okay, we've gone to California, we've got California established. We want to keep going to California, but we also want to go to Colorado. So then it's my job to figure out whether it makes sense to take a bus or a plane, the turn-by-turn directions, how many people we need to bring with us, and how to operationalize that. So I think my board really understands their role, and I also understand mine. So I love it when they give me that direction, and they're so good at envisioning that for ATLIS's members. And then they say, okay, now let's let Christina go figure it out with her team. I say, I'll be back. And then I go and we figure it out and we come back with a plan. So it's really a wonderful partnership. I honestly could not say a bad thing about it. We work really hard at making sure they understand their role. I understand my role, and that together the 1 + 1 can equal 3, as cheesy as that is. I really believe it. So I'm really fortunate to work in an organization where they believe that as much as I do.
I love how you describe that you guys understand the boundaries and your responsibility. And I'm hearing a very clear distinction between the board leading the strategy and directions, whereas the staff operationalize the board's visions. That's really just CAE 101. Thank you.
It is. It takes a lot of work. I mean, it's not always very easy, to be honest, but we're committed to it. So I think that helps.
That's awesome. Thank you. We are getting to the last question of the episode, and I hope you have fun with this one.
I really did.
Imagine that ATLIS is a fictional character. Who would it be?
ATLIS as a fictional character? Oh, wow. You will have to cut out my thinking time. ATLIS as a fictional character. It's got to be some kind of superhero. I mean, the members just do so much and they wear so many hats.
Their superpower as a superhero.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, just looking into the future, like that X-ray vision or something, to just see the future and understand and know how to make adjustments, even when their communities aren't ready to go with them. Like, for example, AI, their communities, their educators might be scared, but the tech leaders are the ones saying, no, this can actually be good and this can facilitate great learning. And so I definitely think there's some kind of superhero in there. They're incredible superheroes for their community, and they're often very unsung heroes. Like maybe the Superman thing where nobody really knows that Superman is Superman. That's definitely reflective of our community too.
For those who are into it, one of the Marvel superhero who can see the future is Doctor Strange. And I'm seeing that's a perfect match for you guys. If I'm also hearing a lot of scenario planning that you guys are doing, which is what Doctor Strange was doing in Endgames. Would you take that?
Let's do that. Okay, then we can be Doctor Strange, even though I have no idea what any of that all means. But I'll go ask my husband. He's a comic book dude, so he'll explain it to me.
There we go. And this is really the end of the episode. Thank you again for your time and open to share your stories with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My name is Christina Lewellen, and you are listening to Humans of Authenticity, the CEO Special Edition.